Hello, friends of Wildland Fire. This is Darren Clable, the State Fire Meteorologist for South Dakota, and welcome to the April 2nd version of our 2024 Wildfire Potential Outlook. So the goals for this outlook are to examine first wildfire climatology, to see when and where kind of wildfires occur throughout the year in different parts of the state. Then we're going to look at some forecast conditions for the next few months and come up with an overall wildland fire potential for the state of South Dakota. Remember that wildfire risk, the overall risk on the landscape for fires, is equal to kind of the environmental potential plus an ignitions potential. And so when I say environmental potential, I'm talking fuels and weather issues, but we also have to have that ignition source that's there. And obviously, we're still early April. We haven't seen really any thunderstorms yet, but we're coming into that season. We're going to start seeing some natural ignition sources out there. But of course, humans are really good at causing fires too. But I'm going to be focusing mostly on the environmental potential because it's tough to forecast the ignitions that are out there. So here's kind of a look at a busy graph, but I'll break it down. Each of these boxes represents a different area of South Dakota, and I've tried to lay it out so it somewhat resembles the state of South Dakota. So in the top left is the Northwest Division, Climate Division. Bottom right is the Southeast Climate Division. The bar graphs are showing area burned for each month of the year. And you'll notice that in the western side of the state, the area burned is really relative to the summer months. That's the time of the year when we get the biggest fires. Central South Dakota shifts a little bit more towards the fall, while eastern South Dakota, we're really just climbing out of their peak fire season right now. So as we move forward and we start thinking about the typical summer fire season, typically those are going to be kind of skewed to the western half or the western third of the state of South Dakota during the summer months of June, July, and August. So focus here is going to be mostly on western South Dakota because of that. So fire season drivers, this time of the year, it's really short-term dryness and above average temperatures. And we've seen that. We had some short-term dryness this spring. In fact, western South Dakota hardly got any moisture from the middle of February through the middle of March, and we saw some record fuel dryness. Not really drought conditions, but just short-term dryness. And of course, we had above average temperatures during that period. Well, now we're in April. We're starting to get into our moist season, and so we're going to thinking ahead towards kind of the typical western South Dakota fire season, which really goes like third week in June through the month of August. June and July, we really need drought conditions to get big fires. Just because these are normally wet months, grass is really green normally. And unless you have drought conditions, you just can't dry down the fuels. Other things that we're looking at is above average temperatures during that time frame. And then, of course, on top of a drought, which I would consider a long-term precipitation deficit, you also have to compound it with short-term precipitation deficits. When we start moving towards August, fuels moisture is starting to get on the decline. So drought's not that big of a deal anymore, but it's still August fire potential is really related to a hot summer and short-term precipitation deficits. So looking back over the past 12 months, this is looking at percent of normal precipitation from April last year to present. The warm colors are below average precipitation. The cool colors are above average precipitation during that year. You can see South Dakota, there's kind of a scattering of everything. Some drier than average conditions across the southeast part of the state, average to maybe slightly above average across western South Dakota. But yeah, there's been some notable dryness in the upper Midwest. The Front Range of Colorado, actually pretty exceptionally wet, but the west slope of Colorado is pretty dry too. And then the northern Rockies are seeing some pretty dry conditions. But yeah, South Dakota, average-ish over the past 12 months. But if we look at the past 90 days, we have temperature departures on the left, and we have percent of normal precipitation on the right. It was an insanely warm winter. I think we can all just look outside and agree with that. I mean, northeastern South Dakota, eastern South Dakota was 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit above average for a 90-day period. That's crazy. That's just obscene warmth in the late winter to early spring months. Black Hills, western South Dakota, right around average. But in terms of precipitation, it's been pretty spotty. Most areas have been pretty dry over the past 3 months, 90 days. That dryness is persisting across the northern Black Hills, the northern part of South Dakota, and going over into the eastern part of South Dakota. There's been a few areas that have seen some beneficial moisture, but yeah, those kind of areas are somewhat limited. Looking at the drought monitor, top left graph is the drought monitor where we were at this time of the year last year, and the bigger graph is kind of where we're at right now. And of course, it's this last drought monitor came out last week, so it's valid as of March 26th. But yeah, you can see there's some abnormally dry conditions across much of South Dakota, and some D1 moderate drought conditions creeping into northwestern South Dakota. Overall, the Great Plains did see some improvement from last year in the U.S. Drought Monitor, as it was a pretty wet summer for a lot of those locations. So this is the Drought Monitor class change. The greens showing improvement in the Drought Monitor. The oranges to the browns are showing degradation in the U.S. Drought Monitor. So by and large, a lot of improvement across South Dakota, and some significant improvements across the central Great Plains. But notable changes, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, it's very, very dry up there. They've had an intensely warm and dry winter. It was actually kind of phenomenal how warm it really was up there. And then, of course, the west slope of Colorado, I already mentioned, there's been a little bit of degradation due to those recent dry conditions there. So let's look kind of late spring through early fall. It's going to be more like late summer, but hey, who's counting? A lot going on here. So this is AMJ. That means it's April, May, and June. And these are forecast temperature anomalies. Top left is the NMME. It's just a model, the North American Multi-Model Ensemble, that looks at kind of a bunch of different models. All of these things down here represent different kind of long-term forecast models. The important thing to take away is you see a lot of red. So pretty much all the dynamic models down below are showing red across virtually all of North America, which implies warmer than average conditions are expected in the April, May, June timeframe. We can look at precipitation during the April, May, June timeframe, and it's kind of a mixed bag, but the probabilistic forecast is actually showing some hints at the potential for wetter than average conditions across South Dakota and the surrounding prairie states. But the dynamic models are kind of all over the place. I wouldn't go ahead and say that, hey, this means we're going to have an average precipitation in April, May, June, but there's no strong signal for above or for below average precipitation, at least from the NMME standpoint. Looking at the Climate Prediction Center's April, May, June outlook, it's largely reflective of what the North American Multi-Model Ensemble is showing. Good chances of above average temperatures across vast areas of the United States. And then you're seeing some of those hints of the potential for maybe above average precipitation across the Dakotas. So the potential's there to have a good spring green up. Granted, we'll probably see warmer than average temperatures through the period. And this drought outlook is somewhat reflective of that. So this is valid for April 1 through June 30th, and it is showing some drought removal or improvement, at least across the areas that are seeing the D1 or worse drought conditions across northwestern South Dakota and northeastern Wyoming. If we extend this out now to June, July, August, JJA, June, July, August, once again, all the models are showing high probabilities of above average temperatures. So there's a lot of confidence in here that we're going to see a summer that's likely warmer than average. And of course, if you look at correlation between wildfires and temperature, they're pretty well correlated. The hotter it is, the more potential you get for big wildfires. In terms of moisture, now there's some signals, at least across the Rocky Mountain region, of drier than average conditions during this same period. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, so maybe by the time we get to mid or late summer, we're seeing a lot of heat, maybe some short-term or precipitation deficits kind of compounded with the drought that's already out there. And we might see some drying of the fuels. And so this is, definitely concerning from my perspective. Hot temperatures, dry fuels, that could lead to wildfires. So it's something we're going to be really looking out for. But I do want to stress that we get the vast majority of our annual precipitation in South Dakota in the months of April, May, and June. So those are like our three wettest months. And so it's really our fire season, late June into July, is really going to be dependent upon the overall amount of spring moisture that we get. Climate Prediction Center's July, August, September, this is actually June, July, August. I made a mistake up there. So this is not September, it's June, July, and August, right? So. But yeah, largely reflective of warmer than average temperature across nearly all of the United States, with higher probabilities of below average precipitation during that period. And again, this is June, July, and August. So to me, this is kind of telling me that, hey, we could see an active fire season once we move into the full summer months. NISC's put out their fire potential outlook for June of 24, and they're showing above normal potential across kind of the desert Southwest, high country Texas, and then below normal fire potential in and around California due to those big atmospheric rivers they've been getting there. Extend this out into July, and now they're starting to show a little bit more potential across the Great Basin, and that potential remains down there in southern New Mexico. The other notable thing on here is Hawaii. They're showing above average potential for wildfires through the summer months. Let's kind of wrap this up with some interesting trends. We're in an El Nino situation right now. An El Nino is a warming of the equatorial Pacific waters, mostly eastern equatorial Pacific waters. So this graph right here is showing sea surface temperature anomalies. The equator is the center line in the middle, and you can see Mexico coastline right there, South America down here, and this just big blob of warmer than average temperatures is kind of a signal that El Nino is there. But we are starting to get some cooler than average ocean waters coming up or the west coast there of South America, which shows that we might be flipping back to a La Nina situation. And matter of fact, that's what all the models are predicting. We're going to come out of this El Nino pretty quickly over the next few months, and rising probabilities of a La Nina. So this is going to impact the weather across North America. Frankly, I've looked at some studies to look at how the El Nino Southern Oscillation is related to wildfire activity in South Dakota, and man, it's tough to come up with trends. So if we look at the past 12 years, 2012 was a very active fire season. We were just coming out of a pretty strong La Nina. 2016, we were coming out of a strong El Nino. That was a pretty active fire year. And this year, of course, we're coming out of a very strong El Nino. So I just putting this out there to show that, hey, there's data points that we're looking at, but it's more or less a tenuous relationship, I think, between fires and El Nino. But it's interesting nonetheless. I'll close out with my contact info right here, and just showing that, hey, you can reach out to me, whatever you want. I got some videos on YouTube that you might find interesting. Feel free to call, feel free to email. But yeah, just try to keep you in the loop as we move through the summer months.